Texas has many images people associate with the state, but perhaps nothing symbolizes modern Texas more powerfully than oil. Before the 20th century, however, few believed Texas possessed significant reserves. John D. Rockefeller, the era's dominant oil magnate, famously declared there was no oil west of the Mississippi River. Yet long before Rockefeller, the land had given hints. In July 1543, Luis de Moscoso, survivor of the De Soto expedition, recorded oil floating between Sabine Pass and High Island. He and his men used it to caulk their boats. In 1854, Frederick Law Olmsted smelled sulphuretted hydrogen at Sour Lake, northwest of Beaumont. In 1866, Linus T. Barrett drilled at Oil Springs in East Texas, establishing the first oil well in Texas. His well produced 10 barrels a day. He had hoped to take advantage of the growing kerosene market. However, price declines would make the venture unfeasible. Small fines followed. In 1886, George Dulnig struck a little oil while drilling for water on his ranch south of San Antonio. However, it was not enough to justify large-scale development. The first economically significant breakthrough came at Corsicana in 1894. There, production climbed steadily, peaking at more than 839,000 barrels in 1900. Texas's first relatively modern refinery was established at the field in 1898, and Corsicana's success encouraged further exploration across Navarro County, culminating in the discovery of the Powell field in 1900. Powell's output surged from 673,221 barrels in 1906 to more than 33 million in 1924, after drillers tapped the Woodbine sand. Convinced by such results, and undeterred by Rockefeller, prospectors scrutinized Texas geology and saw promise around Beaumont. They were right. After several failed shallow attempts at Beaumont's Gladys City, Anthony F. Lucas, backed by Pittsburgh investors and working with the Hamill brothers from Corsicana, spudded a deeper well on October 27, 1900. On January 10, 1901, the Spindletop gusher roared to life. Contemporary estimates of initial flow vary by source, but all agree it was colossal, on the order of 75,000 to 100,000 barrels per day, and it blew for days before being brought under control. Spindletop ignited Texas's first great oil boom. Statewide output went from barely 1,000 barrels for 1896 to about 21 million by 1902. The Spindletop field itself peaked at 17.5 million barrels within a year of its discovery, declined, and was later re-entered in the 1920s and mid-century. By the 1970s, it produced sulfur. Spindletop's success triggered a hunt along similar salt domes across the upper Gulf Coast. Discoveries followed in quick succession throughout the area. The region's crude fed a rapidly expanding network of refineries and pipelines. Early movers included the Texas Company, later Texaco, J.M. Guffey, renamed Gulf Oil in 1907, and Sun and Security, or Standard Oil of New Jersey. Pipelines tied fields to Gulf Coast refineries and shipped unrefined fuel to boilers. By 1904, the Security, Texas, Guffey, and Sun lines alone moved roughly 18 million barrels. Small, tea-kettle refineries proliferated at Spindletop in 1901 and 1902. Then, larger plants followed. For example, Humble Oil and Refining, the forerunner of Exxon, had a complex in Baytown which continuously grew. By 1940, it was the nation's largest, processing 140,000 barrels a day. As oil infrastructure matured, Houston, Beaumont, and Port Arthur diversified. The Houston Ship Channel opened in 1914. After World War I, refineries clustered along its banks. By 1929, refineries employed 27% of Harris County's manufacturing workforce, and total county refining capacity quadrupled by 1940. New Gulf Coast fields sustained the region's rise. Meanwhile, the industry leapt inland. North-central Texas blossomed after the Electra discovery, followed by Burke-Burnett, Iowa Park, and the Wichita County Regular. The fabled Ranger Field spurred a frenzy across Eastland and neighboring counties. Service and supply firms set up in Wichita Falls and Fort Worth. Gulf, Pierce, and Magnolia opened refineries. Texas and Gulf pipelines connected the region to coastal markets, and a 1923 carbon black plant in Stevens County helped launch the Texas petrochemical industry. Such booms transformed towns. Breckenridge, for example, jumped from 800 residents in 1919 to about 30,000 as more than 200 derricks sprouted. Like other boomtowns, it grew with little planning, tents as hotels, tree jails, endemic violence, forcing the state to impose martial law in at least one camp to maintain order. Central Texas revived in 1920. An 18,000-barrel confirmation well-ignited a leasing and drilling surge across one of Texas's oldest producing districts. South and southwest Texas saw smaller, steadier gains, such as at Somerset, Refugio, and Laredo. In the late 1920s, natural gas would be discovered in the region, and pipelines would carry it all the way to Houston. The completion of the Corpus Christi ship channel in 1926 then made the area attractive to refiners. The Panhandle emerged first as a gas giant. In 1918, one well would produce 10 million cubic feet per day. Subsequent wells confirmed a field of national importance that would eventually produce on the order of 8 trillion cubic feet by the 1990s. Oil followed in Hutchinson and Carson counties mid-decade. Pipelines, refineries, gasoline strippers, and carbon black plants multiplied, and towns such as Amarillo surged. However, until the 1920s, Oklahoma had more wells, more workers, and nearly $100 million more revenue than Texas. That advantage evaporated as giant fields were discovered in the Texas Panhandle and the Permian Basin. Pipeline constraints and falling prices forced voluntary production limits in several fields and slowed development late in the decade. Even so, by 1928, Texas produced roughly one-fifth of the world's oil, a dramatic inversion of the state's fortunes and reputation. This surge of wealth drew state attention. Texas levied its first oil production tax in 1905, collecting just over $100,000 in 1906. By 1929, collections neared $6 million. Oil proceeds from public lands, especially in West Texas, endowed state universities, including the University of Texas and Texas A&M, creating durable education funding streams. Culturally, the industry minted powerful archetypes. The wildcatter, the roughneck, the overnight millionaire, etched into folklore and later fiction. Economically, oil supplanted longhorns as the emblem of Texas modernity. East Texas transformed the industry in 1930 when a massive field stretching more than 40 miles across several counties was discovered. The production surge collapsed prices. East Texas crude fell to 22 cents per barrel by mid-1931, with illicit hot oil selling for just cents, and stalled exploration elsewhere. The field exploded to over 3,000 wells by the end of 1931, with refineries quickly multiplying. Attempts to control output sparked clashes among the Railroad Commission, Governor Ross Sterling, operators, and the courts. Even a National Guard shutdown failed to hold. Only with federal enforcement under the National Industrial Recovery Act and better pressure measurement technology did proration take hold. By 1935, the field had more than 19,000 wells. Production stabilized at about 159 million barrels, and major companies handled roughly half the output. The 1950s and 1960s brought major gas discoveries from Katy to the Permian's Gomez and beyond, and steady petrochemical expansion. Styrene, butadiene, polypropylene, benzene, synthetic rubber, and ammonia plants proliferated, even as oil reserves, after peaking in the early 1950s, trended downward. Cheap, foreign, crude battered independence. During the 1960s, consolidation of the smaller oil companies accelerated, and by the end of the decade, many small producers had disappeared. Global shocks reshaped the 1970s oil industry. The 1973 Arab embargo gave OPEC control over prices, sending Arabian crude from $5.40 to $17 in weeks. Despite U.S. price control categories, Texas drilling surged, slowing reserve declines. The 1979-80 Iranian crisis and price decontrol lifted U.S. crude from about $12.64 to the low 30s. Texas rigs jumped from 770 in 1979 to 1,118 in 1981 as record lease bids poured in. But higher costs, new regulations, and the 1980 windfall profits tax squeezed capital. When demand softened and OPEC unity faltered, prices collapsed, triggering failures across oil, banking, and real estate. Texas rig counts fell by more than half in 1986 and kept dropping. By the early 1990s, Texas still led the nation in refining. processing over 1.6 billion barrels in 1992, much of it heavier, higher sulfur, imported crude. Yet oil and gas had become a much smaller part of the state economy. Their share of economic activity fell from over 25% in 1981 to about half that a decade later, and their share of state revenue dropped from 28% in 1983 to around 7% by 1993. Drilling-dependent communities faced layoffs and shrinking budgets, prompting efforts to diversify. Petrochemicals were the exception, expanding on the strength of cheaper feedstocks and remaining globally competitive despite nearly $1 billion per year in pollution control costs by the mid-1990s. Texas's modern identity was built on oil. Petroleum wealth reshaped the state's economy, politics, and culture, financing universities and infrastructure, driving the rise of ports, pipelines, boomtowns, and corporate skylines, and inspiring a long-lasting frontier mythology of drillers and risk-takers. From early tar sightings in the 1500s to landmark discoveries like Spindletop, and through the development of Gulf Coast refineries, Panhandle gas fields, and the resilient Permian Basin, hydrocarbons defined Texas's growth. By the late 20th century, global markets increasingly dictated the industry's direction, yet oil remained a defining and enduring symbol of the Lone Star State.